They said no one walked out of Austin's Southfield shelter once the red tags were hung, where the heat shimmered off metal cages and hope died slower than the summer sun. But that July afternoon, when the air smelled of rust and despair, Emily Carter, a woman in a crimson jacket, stepped through those doors and saw two German shepherds the world had already given up on. They said the dogs were too broken, too dangerous, too far gone. Yet when Emily knelt before their cage, something ancient and wordless passed between them, a promise neither chains nor fear could hold. What happened next would set the whole city whispering, a story of two condemned souls who learned that even in the blaze of a Texas summer, mercy can burn hotter than fire. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? And if this story moves you, subscribe and stay close. Because in this heat, every heartbeat can become a miracle. The heat of an Austin summer could melt even the hardest asphalt. The city pulsed under the kind of sun that made metals sigh and dogs pant in the shade of rusting fences. The Southfield Animal Shelter sat on the edge of town, half forgotten between the old train yard and the dusty service road that led nowhere. The air inside was thick with disinfectant and sorrow. Overhead, fans groaned as they tried to push the air that never cooled. It smelled of bleach, fur, and resignation. In one far corner, where the fluorescent lights flickered weakest, two cages stood apart from the rest. Inside, two German shepherds lay motionless, their bodies thin, their coats dulled to the color of burnt sand. The first, Rex, had once been the kind of dog that commanded a room. He was large even for his breed, broad chest, strong shoulders, but now his ribs showed faintly beneath his fur. A long scar ran across his muzzle, a reminder of a fight no one had cared enough to ask about. His eyes, once sharp amber, now held the stillness of something that had seen too much and chosen silence. The other, Shadow, smaller but younger, maybe 3 years old, had darker fur and a white streak along his chest. He limped slightly when he shifted positions, the result of an old bullet wound that had never healed right. Shadow's gaze was more restless than Rex's, guarded, alert, a flicker of defiance left in him. Both had once been canine service dogs, trained to track, protect, and fight, but when the missions ended and the scars remained, they were labeled unfit for service and sent here to wait. Sarah Jennings, the senior shelter worker, moved slowly down the aisle with a clipboard in hand. She was in her early 40s, tall and wiry, her pale blonde hair tied back into a bun that sagged under the heat. Her skin was sun-tanned, her eyes lined from too many years of paperwork and heartbreak. Sarah had worked at the shelter long enough to know how every story ended. She paused at the final cages, her pen tapping against the metal clipboard. "Poor boys," she murmured softly. "You deserved better." But pity didn't change the schedule. On her sheet, beside the words Rex and Shadow, a red tag was clipped. Final notice, July 12th. The clock above the office door ticked lazily toward noon when the entrance bell jingled. Sarah barely looked up. Few visitors came in the middle of such a blistering day, but when the door swung open, the heat from outside collided with the cold air inside, stirring the smell of metal and fur. A young woman stepped in, brushing a strand of chestnut hair from her cheek. She wore a thin red jacket, faded jeans, and boots scuffed from travel. The receptionist glanced up. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The woman's voice was quiet but sure. "I'm looking to adopt." Sarah turned, surprised. "Hot day to be saving lives," she said, forcing a small smile. The woman walked slowly along the rows of cages, her hazel eyes, scanning each one with care. Some dogs barked eagerly, pressing against the bars. Others wagged their tails at the promise of attention. But the woman didn't stop for any of them. She moved past the noise, her steps soft, until she reached the dim back corner. When she stopped before Rex and Shadow's cage, the dogs barely stirred. Rex opened one eye, measuring her. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching, his body tensed as if preparing to defend something unseen. The woman crouched slightly, letting the sleeve of her red jacket brush the floor. "Hey there," she whispered. Her tone wasn't sugary or timid. It carried something heavier. Familiar pain, perhaps. Sarah sighed from a few feet away. "Those two. Not good choices. They've got history. Baggage, if you know what I mean." The woman turned her head, her expression calm but distant. "So do I." Sarah blinked. "Name's Sarah, by the way. You sure you want to start with the hardest ones?" The woman smiled faintly. "My name's Emily Carter," she said, "and I've never been good at starting easy." Sarah hesitated, studying her. Emily looked to be around 28, maybe 30. She was slim but strong, the kind of strength that came from moving forward no matter how many times life had knocked her down. A faint white scar traced her left wrist, half hidden by a leather bracelet. When she noticed Sarah's eyes linger, she pulled her sleeve down. "Old accident," she said simply, and Sarah didn't ask more. Emily turned back to the cage. Rex stood now, his tail low but not tucked. Shadow stayed close behind him, watching. The woman's gaze softened. "You were soldiers once, weren't you?" she murmured. Rex tilted his head slightly, as though recognizing the tone if not the words. "They were military dogs," Sarah said from behind her. "Got retired after an explosion down south. One handler died, the other quit. No family wanted the responsibility." Emily's voice came quiet but steady. "And now?" Sarah exhaled, adjusting her clipboard. "Now, they've run out of tomorrows." The hum of the fans filled the silence. Emily looked at Rex, then at Shadow, and something flickered across her face, an echo of memory. "My brother served," she said softly. "Didn't make it home. He had a shepherd, too." She didn't elaborate, but the weight in her words was enough. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, realizing this woman wasn't just another visitor. Emily reached through the bars, slowly, not touching, just letting her fingers rest in the air between them. "I see it in their eyes," she said. "That thing that happens when someone takes everything from you, and you still find a way to breathe." Rex moved first. His nose brushed the air near her hand, testing. Shadow growled low, protective, but Emily didn't flinch. She just waited, still and patient, her heartbeat steady in the sweltering air. Then, unexpectedly, Rex took a single step forward, pressing his nose gently against her palm. Sarah froze, eyes wide. "Well, I'll be damned." Emily smiled faintly, tears shining in the corners of her eyes but never falling. "You see," she whispered, "they're not broken, just waiting for someone to see them." Sarah hesitated, then scribbled a note on her clipboard. "You know, once in a while, a miracle sneaks in under the paperwork." But the moment didn't last long. A loud clang echoed from the maintenance room, a wrench dropping against concrete. Rex jerked upright, growling. The fluorescent light above them flickered twice and dimmed. Emily rose slowly, her hand still near the bars. "Easy, boy," she murmured. The air felt charged, like the breath before a storm. Shadow stood beside Rex, hackles raised, both pairs of amber eyes fixed on something beyond the gate. Sarah frowned, looking toward the noise. "Probably just the janitor," she said, though her tone carried no certainty. Emily kept her gaze on the dogs. "Or maybe," she whispered, "they're seeing something we can't." The lights flickered again. A metallic clatter echoed through the hallway, closer this time. Rex's growl deepened. Shadow shifted forward, and Emily's hand touched the cold metal bars between them. For a heartbeat, the entire shelter seemed to hold its breath. Then, clang! Something heavy fell in the next room. Emily didn't move. Neither did the dogs. The fluorescent lights flickered once more, then steadied, casting long shadows across the floor. Sarah muttered under her breath and went to check the noise. Emily stayed. Her palm rested against the cage as Rex and Shadow stared back at her, two pairs of eyes gleaming gold in the trembling light, like souls caught between fear and recognition. Somewhere deep in the shelter, a door creaked open. A single metallic sound echoed, and then silence. The air inside the small office felt heavier than the heat outside. The whirring ceiling fan did little more than stir the scent of paper, dust, and antiseptic. A single window let in a blade of sunlight that fell across the cluttered desk where Sarah Jennings sat, tapping a pen against the adoption forms. The red jacket of Emily Carter stood out against the washed-out walls, like a streak of color refusing to fade in a world of beige. Her hair clung slightly to her neck from the heat, but she looked calm, steady, almost defiant. Sarah leaned forward, her pale blue eyes narrowing. "You understand what you're signing up for, don't you?" she said. "Those dogs, Rex and Shadow, they're not the cuddly kind. Rex once attacked a handler, and Shadow, well, that one's unpredictable. Head trauma, maybe. Some say he sees ghosts where there aren't any." Emily met her gaze. "And yet they trusted me," she replied softly. "That's worth more than warnings." Sarah frowned. "Lady, I've been doing this for 20 years. People come in all hearts and tears, thinking they'll save something broken. But these two? They bite back at the world. They don't forget." Emily's eyes flickered for a moment. Just a moment, before she signed her name at the bottom of the page. "Neither do I." The printer whirred. The papers slid out, warm and official. Sarah shook her head, muttering, "Braver souls than me have walked out that door with less." She stood, wiping her forehead. "There's a guy out back who can help you load them. You'll need him." Out in the yard, Tom Alvarez, the kennel technician, was finishing his shift. He was in his early 30s, broad-shouldered with sunburned skin and a beard that never quite grew evenly. His tattoos peeked out from under his rolled-up sleeves, military ink, old and faded. Tom had served in Afghanistan before coming back to Texas, where he found work caring for animals because, as he once said, they don't lie like people do. When Sarah waved him over, he nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "These the shepherds?" he asked, glancing toward the cages. "The ones no one touches?" Emily extended her hand politely. "Emily Carter." Tom looked her over, small frame, red jacket, steady eyes, and gave a half smile. "Ma'am, I hope you know what you're doing." She smiled faintly. "That makes two of us." Tom brought the dogs out one at a time. Rex came first, tense but obedient under the leash. Shadow followed, ears flat, limping slightly, his tail lowered. Tom kept a firm grip but didn't pull. "They don't trust easy," he said quietly. "Guess neither do I." Emily crouched to their level. "That makes three of us then," she said softly, meeting Rex's gaze. For a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe even respect. By the time the paperwork was stamped and Rex and Shadow were loaded into the back of Emily's old pickup, the asphalt outside shimmered like glass under the Texas sun. The truck itself was a relic. Faded blue paint, a cracked windshield, and a passenger seat littered with empty water bottles and dog supplies. It had once belonged to her father, who used it to deliver rescue equipment across storm-battered counties. Emily kept it running out of sentiment, even though the air conditioner coughed more than it breathed. As she started the engine, Sarah leaned into the open driver's side window. "You ever been around working dogs before?" Emily nodded. "I used to be on a search and rescue team," she said quietly. "That was years ago." Sarah's brow softened. "That explains it," she murmured. "The way you look at them. Like you've already seen the worst." Emily adjusted her sunglasses. "Maybe I have." The truck rattled onto the highway, leaving the low hum of the shelter behind. In the rearview mirror, Emily could see Rex sitting upright in the truck bed, his amber eyes scanning the horizon, while Shadow lay curled near the tailgate, his ears flicking at every sound. The open road stretched before them, an endless ribbon of heat shimmering between patches of dying grass and abandoned billboards. Emily kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the gear shift, her fingers tapping unconsciously to the rhythm of the tires on asphalt. For a while there was peace. The dogs seemed content watching the blur of fields and distant trees. Emily's thoughts drifted to her brother, Ryan Carter, whose memory had followed her like a shadow since the explosion that took his life 3 years earlier. He had been a police officer, proud and reckless, the kind who believed rules were meant to protect the innocent, until the day they didn't. His partner had been a German shepherd named Duke. When Ryan died, Duke wouldn't eat for days. Emily had sat beside that dog until he finally slipped away, and since then, she'd carried a quiet ache that had never found rest. Her focus snapped back when Rex suddenly stood, muscles rigid, barking deep and low. Shadow rose next, growling, his eyes locked on the road behind them. Emily frowned and glanced into the side mirror. A dark SUV had appeared half a mile back, its windows tinted, moving too smoothly to be casual traffic. She slowed slightly. The SUV slowed too. "Easy, boys," she muttered. "Probably nothing." But her pulse quickened. The highway stretched wide and empty, sun bleeding across the sky like molten copper. She pressed the accelerator gently, and the truck picked up speed. The SUV did the same. Its grille gleamed, closing the distance inch by inch. Shadow barked sharply, teeth bared. Rex braced himself, claws scraping the metal floor of the truck bed. Emily's grip tightened on the wheel. The old truck shuddered with the strain, but she didn't let up. The SUV was closer now, close enough for her to see the reflection of her own truck in its blackened windshield. Then, for a brief, blinding moment, sunlight flashed off something metallic from the passenger window. She blinked, squinting. Someone inside was leaning out, arm raised, something glinting in their hand. Emily's stomach dropped. She slammed the accelerator to the floor. The truck roared forward, engine protesting, tires screaming against the baking asphalt. The dogs barked furiously as the wind whipped through the open windows. The SUV responded instantly, speeding up to match her pace. In the mirror, she saw the silhouette of a man, a shape against the glare, leaning further out the window, his jacket flapping wildly in the wind, and in his hand, something caught the sun again, something sharp. The Texas heat swallowed the road, turning the world into a blur of light and noise. Emily's heart pounded as she gripped the wheel tighter, her red jacket glowing like a warning flame against the endless summer sky. And then, just as the first sound cracked through the air, the scene froze in her mind, suspended between fear and fury. The old wooden house sat at the edge of Austin, where the city lights faded into long stretches of parched grass, and the night smelled of dry cedar and dust. The structure was small, barely 3 rooms and a porch that leaned slightly to one side, but it had something most places didn't: silence. After the chaos on the highway, Emily had taken a detour through back roads until the black SUV disappeared from her mirror. Now, the sun had long since dipped below the horizon, and the Texas night pressed close around her. Cicadas screamed in the trees like something ancient and restless. The headlights of her truck dimmed as she parked in front of the house, the engine sighing its last breath. She stepped out, stretching her arms and looking up at the sky, where faint stars flickered between drifting clouds. Her red jacket glowed dully under the porch light as she opened the back of the truck. "Come on, boys," she murmured. Rex jumped down first, landing heavily on the dirt. Shadow followed slower, his limp more noticeable under the dim light. He was breathing unevenly, a soft whine caught in his throat. Emily crouched, running her fingers gently through his fur. "You did good today." She led them inside, where the air smelled faintly of cedar and rain that hadn't fallen yet. The house belonged to Mrs. Hattie Moore, an elderly widow who rented the place to Emily for cheap. Hattie was in her late 60s, with iron-gray hair pinned up in a bun and skin like wrinkled parchment. She had the kind of face that looked stern until she smiled. Then everything softened. "You picked a fine time to bring in beasts," she had said earlier that day when handing over the key, her southern drawl rolling like slow honey. "Storm's coming tomorrow. Don't say I didn't warn you." Emily had only nodded. She wasn't afraid of storms. Not anymore. Inside, she laid out blankets on the wooden floor. The boards creaked beneath her steps as she fetched a bowl of water and an old first aid kit. Rex lay down with a heavy sigh, head resting on his paws, eyes following her every move. Shadow sat closer, his ears twitching at every sound outside. When she knelt beside Rex, her fingers brushed against a ridge on his neck, rough and raised, hidden under the fur. Frowning, she parted the hair and traced the scar. There, faint but unmistakable, were burned-in letters. "Unit 47, Special K-9 Division." Her pulse quickened. "What happened to you?" she whispered. The words seemed to stir something in him. Rex's ears flicked back, and he let out a low growl, not at her, but as if warning her about the past itself. Emily reached for her laptop from her backpack, the screen lighting her face in the dim room. She typed the words into a search bar. At first, nothing. Then, a few buried records surfaced. A declassified military project, Special K-9 Division, disbanded 5 years ago after a classified incident during an operation in Arizona. 3 dogs listed as missing in action. Emily's eyes widened. 3? She murmured. "Where's the 3rd? Her gaze shifted between Rex and Shadow. Both were staring back at her, silent as statues. As she scrolled through a forgotten news forum, one comment caught her attention, written by someone under the username VetMark77. Unit 47 wasn't shut down because of failure. They were erased. Those dogs saw something they shouldn't have. Her stomach knotted. She shut the laptop as a gust of wind rattled the windows. The porch light outside flickered. Shadow stood abruptly, hackles raised, a low growl vibrating in his throat. Emily froze. "It's just the wind," she said automatically, though her own voice sounded uncertain. Rex lifted his head, eyes fixed on the back door. His tail lay still against the floorboards. Emily listened. Beneath the whisper of wind and the rasping of insects, she heard it. Faint footsteps crunching through dry grass. Slow, measured, too heavy to be animal. She moved quietly to the window, parting the curtain just enough to see the faint outline of the fence in the yard. The security light flickered again, and for a split second, she saw it. A shadow, tall and human-shaped, moving near the gate. Her breath caught. She reached for her phone on the counter, thumb hovering over the screen. A faint click echoed through the air. The gate latch. Rex growled deep in his chest, the sound primal and cold. Shadow moved to stand beside him, his limp forgotten, both of them now facing the same direction. The back door. Emily whispered, "Stay close," as she slowly reached toward the nearby light switch. Her mind raced. The SUV, the tag on Rex's neck, the erased records. Someone was looking for them and had found her instead. The house groaned under the wind. The porch boards creaked. A second click, this time closer. The door handle moved. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. She flicked the light switch. The bulb buzzed to life, harsh, yellow light flooding the small kitchen. Rex lunged forward, barking with a force that shook the air. Shadow followed, his bark sharper, more frantic. Emily's eyes darted toward the back door, just in time to see the latch lifting, the metal glinting under the light. Without thinking, she grabbed the nearest thing, a cast-iron pan from the stove, and stepped forward. The dogs stood shoulder to shoulder, bodies coiled like springs. Then it happened. The slow creak of the door swinging inward. A hand, gloved and pale, slipped through the gap, reaching for the lock. "Not tonight," Emily whispered, her knuckles white around the handle. The sound of Rex's snarl filled the room like thunder. Morning came with a vengeance. The Texas sun bled across the horizon, spilling molten light over fields of brittle grass that whispered against the wind. Emily woke with a start to the sound of Rex pacing near the door, his claws clicking softly on the floorboards. Shadow sat upright by the window, his ears pricked and tail stiff. The air smelled of dust and something faintly metallic. She rubbed her eyes, still groggy, and noticed immediately. The back door hung slightly open. Her heart lurched. She stepped forward, the floor groaning beneath her feet. The latch was bent, the frame splintered. Someone had forced it during the night. On the small kitchen table lay a piece of yellowed paper, the edges curled and torn. Written in rushed, jagged handwriting were the words, "If you know who they are, don't let anyone find them." Emily's breath caught. The note was smeared with dirt, and a faint boot print marked the edge of the floor beneath it. "Who are you?" she whispered under her breath, glancing toward the fields beyond the window. The morning was too quiet. Even the cicadas had gone still. After checking the doors and windows, she packed her backpack with her laptop, flashlight, and a small pistol, a relic from her father's days as a firefighter, given to her for emergencies. She had never thought she'd actually need it. Rex stood by the doorway, watching her, his amber eyes sharp. Shadow limped to her side, pressing his shoulder against her leg, as if urging her forward. They drove north, leaving behind the wooden house and the heat-soaked silence that clung to it. The truck rattled along a cracked service road until they reached the industrial outskirts of the city. An expanse of abandoned warehouses and sun-bleached signage, ghosts of businesses that had once thrived. The wind carried the smell of rust and motor oil. Emily parked near a chain-link fence that had long since lost its gate. The warehouse beyond it stood crooked against the blazing sky, its roof sagging, walls tattooed with graffiti. "This must be it," she murmured. Both dogs were restless, tails low but alert. Rex sniffed the air and growled softly, his nose turning toward the western wall. Shadow followed him, his gait uneven but purposeful. Inside, the air was cool and heavy, carrying the faint scent of mold and old machinery. Shafts of sunlight cut through holes in the ceiling, painting golden stripes across the concrete floor. Emily's boots echoed as she walked, every sound swallowed quickly by the cavernous silence. She passed stacks of rusted crates, and the husk of a forklift collapsed under its own weight. In the far corner stood a metal cabinet, its door slightly ajar. Emily knelt, pulling it open. Inside were papers eaten by time and a single sealed envelope stamped with the faded insignia of the Department of Defense. Her pulse quickened. She tore it open and found a small data card taped to the inside. Scrawled next to it was a note in block handwriting. Project Sentinel. Do not access without clearance. Her hands trembled slightly as she slipped the card into her laptop. The screen flickered to life, lines of encrypted text scrolling past. Then came the header. Project Sentinel. Neural conditioning for enhanced cognitive recognition in canine units. Her breath quickened. "Oh my God." The reports described experiments, training dogs to detect emotional intent, to anticipate commands before they were spoken. Then came another line that froze her blood. Subjects 045 Rex, 046 Shadow, 047, status unknown. 3, she murmured, always 3. Her thoughts spiraled. Someone had erased this program, buried it along with its survivors. The SUV, the note, the intrusion. They weren't coincidences. Someone was still protecting these secrets. A faint sound broke the silence, a crunch of gravel outside. Rex's ears snapped forward. Shadow let out a low, warning growl. Emily closed the laptop, killing the glow. She grabbed her flashlight and turned it on, the beam slicing through the dim air. From the shadowed doorway at the back of the warehouse came a voice, calm but laced with steel. "I told you to stay away, Emily." She froze. The voice was familiar, low, deliberate, and unmistakably controlled. She turned slowly. A man stepped from the darkness. He wore a black vest and gray slacks, his shirt crisp despite the heat. His hair was dark and slicked back, streaked faintly with silver at the temples. A thin scar cut down from his left eyebrow to his cheek, the kind earned in close quarters. His build was lean but strong, like someone trained to move efficiently, not flashily. In his right hand he held a suppressed handgun, the barrel angled casually toward the floor. Emily's stomach turned. "Who are you?" The man's eyes, pale gray and cold, met hers. "Someone who once believed in the same cause you're chasing." Rex growled, stepping forward, his body low. The man raised the gun slightly, but didn't fire. "Easy, soldier," he said, his voice dropping. "You remember me, don't you?" Emily's mind raced. The way he said soldier, the tone. "You worked with them," she said, her voice shaking. "You were part of Unit 47. The corner of his mouth twitched, a shadow of something between pride and regret. "Was," he said simply, "until they made me erase them." The tension in the room was thick enough to feel. Emily took a step back, her heart pounding. "Then why are you here?" The man's grip on the gun tightened. "Because someone else is coming," he said quietly. "And they won't ask questions." The words barely left his mouth when a sharp metallic noise echoed through the building, the sound of a door slamming open at the far end. The man's eyes darted toward it, his expression tightening. "Too late," he muttered. Emily reached instinctively for her pistol. Rex's hackles rose, teeth bared. The man turned his gaze back to her, his voice barely a whisper. "Whatever happens, don't let them take the data." A second later, the world exploded into motion. The flicker of shadows, the echo of boots, the blinding glare of sunlight bursting through the broken door. The storm broke over Austin, like the sky itself had split open. Thunder rolled across the horizon, shaking the cracked windows of the abandoned warehouse. Rain came in sheets, hot and heavy, hissing as it struck the sun-baked concrete. Emily stood frozen, the air thick with gun oil and fear. The man in the black vest, the one who had warned her, now stood between her and the open doorway, his gun raised, his expression unreadable. "Don't move," he said, voice taut. The silver light from the storm flashed across his scar, making him look half human, half ghost. "They're already here." Before Emily could answer, another figure emerged from the rain outside. A broad-shouldered man in tactical gear, visor down, weapon drawn. His uniform bore the insignia FKDU, Federal Canine Disposal Unit. His steps were precise, calculated, the movements of someone who had done this many times before. "Agent Cole Turner," the man in the doorway said bitterly, his tone low. "You never could resist finishing what others started." Agent Cole Turner was in his late 30s, tall and built like someone who lived on caffeine and adrenaline. His jaw was clean-shaven, the sharp angles of his face accentuated by exhaustion. His hair, soaked dark from the rain, clung to his temples. Years of enforcement work had carved deep lines beside his mouth and eyes, the kind that came from too many nights staring through rifle scopes and too few nights of sleep. He didn't look cruel, just empty, as if duty had scraped everything else away. "Step aside," Cole said evenly, his voice almost mechanical. "The dogs are property of the state." Rex's growl rumbled through the room like distant thunder. Shadow, trembling but defiant, stepped in front of Emily. The man in the black vest, whom Emily now realized must once have been their handler, raised his voice. "They're not property, Cole. They're survivors. You think killing them erases what we did? It only buries the guilt deeper." Cole's eyes flickered for the briefest moment, a muscle in his jaw tightening. "Orders don't care about guilt," he replied, his tone flat. "Orders clean up the mess." Lightning illuminated the scene in harsh white flashes. Emily's heart pounded as the three figures stood locked in a standoff, the storm screaming outside. The man in the vest took a slow step back, lowering his weapon just enough to speak to her. "Emily," he said quietly, "take them and run." But Cole moved first. His gun rose, the suppressor glinting under the flicker of lightning. Time seemed to stretch thin, each heartbeat a hammer blow in Emily's ears. Then everything happened at once. The gun fired, muffled but deafening in the enclosed space. Shadow lunged forward, teeth sinking into Cole's forearm. The shot went wide, slamming into the wall. Cole grunted in pain, swinging the weapon downward as Shadow refused to let go. Rex surged next, slamming his body into Chafwin. Emily, knocking her to the ground, just as another shot cracked through the air. the smell of gunpowder mixed with the scent of wet fur and blood. The man in the black vest fired back, his own weapon barking once before Cole staggered. Then silence, broken only by the ragged breathing of the dogs and the hammering rain outside. Cole fell to one knee, his weapon clattering to the floor. His hand clutched his side, dark spreading through the fabric. "You don't understand," he gasped. "They were never supposed to live." His head bowed, the strength draining from his voice. Sentinel wasn't about saving dogs. It was about controlling soldiers. The man in the vest moved closer, lowering his gun. His voice softened for the first time. "Then maybe it's time we proved the experiment wrong." Cole's body slumped. The storm outside swallowed his final breath. Emily pushed herself up, her heart racing. Rex stood beside her, his shoulder bleeding, fur matted dark. Shadow lay panting, his eyes half closed, blood trickling down his muzzle from the struggle. "No, no, stay with me," she whispered, cradling his head. The man in the vest knelt beside her, checking Rex's wound with practiced hands. His voice was low, almost reverent. "They fought for you, sir," he said. "After everything, they still chose to protect." A flash of lightning revealed Cole's fallen badge glinting beside the doorway. Federal K-9 Disposal Unit. Emily stared at it, her throat tightening. All this, just to erase them. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder. The man in the vest stood, slipping a folded piece of paper into her hand. "That's everything I know," he said. "You'll need it when they start asking questions." "What about you?" she asked, looking up. He hesitated, rain dripping from his jawline. "People like me don't get redemption, Emily. We just make sure someone else does." Then he stepped back into the storm and was gone before she could say another word. When the police arrived minutes later, 2 squad cars, blue lights flickering through the rain. Emily stood in the center of the warehouse, drenched and trembling. An officer approached, a middle-aged woman with short, dark hair and a cautious tone. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" she asked. Emily shook her head, her voice barely audible. "Not me. Them." She looked down at the dogs. Rex stood, blood drying along his fur, his eyes still sharp. Shadow, weaker, pressed against her leg. "They're the reason I'm alive," she said softly. "And they're not property. They're survivors." The officer nodded slowly, her expression softening. "Then let's get them somewhere safe." Weeks passed. The story spread quietly, how an ex-rescue worker had uncovered a classified experiment buried by the government. How 2 dogs once deemed dangerous had saved a woman's life. How a storm in Austin had washed away more than just blood. Months later, summer returned. The city breathed again. In the heart of Austin's Central Park, Emily sat on a sun-warmed bench wearing her familiar red jacket. Rex and Shadow lay at her feet, their coats healthy, eyes bright. Children's laughter carried on the wind, and for the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a memory. A small boy, no older than 8, approached hesitantly. "Can I pet them?" he asked. Emily smiled, her eyes glinting with sunlight. "Don't be afraid," she said. "They just needed someone to believe in them, like I once did." As the boy reached out, Rex leaned forward, tail thumping softly against the ground. The golden light of the late afternoon spilled over them, wrapping the 3 figures in warmth. In Rex's eyes, the world reflected. The city, the park, and the woman in red, who had seen worth where no one else had looked. They said miracles were rare, that heaven no longer sent them. But sometimes they don't come with wings or light from above. Sometimes they walk on four legs, scarred and silent, carrying a love fierce enough to heal what life has broken. Rex and Shadow were never meant to survive, yet by grace they did. And through them, Emily learned that even in a world that forgets mercy, God still whispers through the ones who refuse to give up. Maybe your own miracle is waiting too, not in thunder or lightning, but in the quiet loyalty beside you, in the forgiveness you've yet to give, or in the faith you've nearly lost. If this story touched you, share it. Leave a comment below and tell us what you believe in: faith, love, or the miracles that walk among us. And if you'd like to keep this circle of hope alive, subscribe and stay with us for more stories where courage meets compassion. May God bless you, and may every soul, human or animal, find the grace to be seen, to be saved, and to be loved.